If you support any left-leaning view on the internet, whether you're as radical as a Marxist-Leninist or as tame as a social democrat, you know how hard it is to advocate for its policies before your argument gets shut down by the sacred text. But what about human nature? And many other wacky, stupid and downright wrong arguments that I will be debunking in this video. Welcome back everyone, it's me, the People's Union of Wales, and today I will be debunking the most common anti-communist arguments. Now, for those who are conservative and don't really want to listen to me because they disagree with me, watch the video. It will help you not make yourself look like a fool in the comment section when I already debunked your argument in the video. Also, if you want to have a rational debate, don't be an asshole. I'm willing to have a friendly discussion with you if you are willing to do the same. If you're going to insult me, at least be creative. Also, for those wondering when my Welsh independence video was coming out, please wait until the end of the video. Now with that out of the way, let's start the video. But before we get into the arguments, what is socialism? Well, socialism is a social and economic system where the workers have common ownership of the means of production, distribution and exchange. Similar to that is communism, which is a stateless, moneyless and classless society with common ownership of the means of production. So, these are the definitions that we'll be using in this video. So, keep these in mind. Communists want to take away my property. This argument is really misleading. Many anti-communists love to point at this quote from their Communist Manifesto. The theory of the communists may be summed up in a single sentence: abolition of private property. And they just stop there. They don't point out the fact that they just nitpick the quote to suit their agenda. For those who actually read the manifesto, you would know that Marx wrote, literally a second earlier, the distinguishing feature of communism is not the abolition of property generally, but the abolition of bourgeois property. But the modern bourgeois private property is the final and most complete expression of the system of producing and appropriating products. That is, based on class antagonisms, on the exploitation of the many by the few. So, communists don't want to take away your toothbrush or your fucking doorway. The communist definition of private property is the private ownership of the means of production. When communists say they want to abolish private property, what they mean is that they want to take factories, hospitals and other forms of labour out of the hands of the bourgeoisie and let the workers own their own labour. Hitler was a socialist. I've actually come across two people in my time that have used this argument. Exonoy Paz, or his official name now, secretary of everyone who is slightly centre left is a commie, and a friend of mine. They get this idea from the fact that Hitler called himself a socialist and Nazi stands for National Socialist, but they forget that none of Hitler's policies were socialist. When the Nazi Party took over Germany, they privatised previously state-owned companies, they banned labour unions from political activities, they shut down, arrested and outright murdered any opposition, including communists, and they let companies help them. I'll list a few on what they did. Hugo Boss made SS uniforms, Porsche made German vehicles such as the prototype Tiger tank, later the Ferdinand tank destroyer, also known as Elephant. Henschel also made vehicles for the Wehrmacht, such as the production Tiger tank. Krupp produced steel tanks and ordnance for the Wehrmacht. The steel that they built was used in Auschwitz. IG Farben produced and sold Zyklon B, the gas used in Auschwitz. Mittelwerk GmbH was co-owned between the Nazis and private individuals. They produced the Vengeance 1, V1 and Vengeance 2, V2 with slave labour. And there are many more. I suggest you guys watch the video from the YouTube channel called The Front. He does it better than I. Also, Democratic Socialist and Hakim have good videos on the topic. The usual response to this counter-argument is, but Hitler called himself a socialist. Look at this quote. And then they show you a quote that was actually said by Gregor Strasser, the founder of Strasserism, a man who was killed by Hitler. Strasser, in his argument from June the 25th, 1926, called Thoughts About the Tasks of the Future, said the quote that is wrongly assumed as Hitler's. But Strasser was in the Nazi Party. Yes, but in the same material I cited, Strasser says, the spirit that needs to be overcome is the spirit of materialism. We must achieve an entirely new kind of economic thinking, a thinking which frees itself from the present conceptions rooted in money, in property, in profit, and in false success. It is an indication of the Marxist, the false socialism. Also, according to a German historian by the name of Helmut Heiber in his book titled Adolf Hitler, A Short Biography, Page 68. In October 1930, Adolf Hitler told Otto Strasser, Gregor Strasser's brother and founder of the Black Front, a faction that separated from the NSDAP because of the massive wave of Hitlerism in the party. Do you think I'm crazy as to destroy German heavy industry? Those producers worked their way to the top by their own merit, and because of this process of selection, which proves they are an elite, they have a right to lead. I think this clears up any misconceptions you had before of Hitler being a socialist, or even Gregor Strasser being a socialist for that matter. No food. The fact that many communist countries had famines is mocked again and again, but what people fail to realise is that after these famines, those countries secured food for the rest of their existence. A study called Economic Development, Political Economic System and the Physical Quality of Life compared socialist and capitalist countries based off equal levels of economic development and the physical quality of life. The data used is from the World Development Report of the World Bank. Not only does it show that the daily per capita calorie supply was higher in socialist countries than the one in capitalist countries, the difference averaged around 12 to 15%, it also shows that socialist countries had a lower child death rate, higher life expectancy, population per physician, population per nursing person, adult literacy and secondary education. Above all else, the PQLI, also known as the Physical Quality of Life Index, shows how superior socialist citizens' lives were compared to capitalist citizens, especially amongst the working class. The document goes on to say, historically, there is some evidence that the discrepancies between socialist and capitalist nations have reflected varying social policies. All the socialist countries have initiated major public health efforts. These initiatives have aimed towards improved sanitation, immunization, maternal and childcare, nutrition and housing. In every case, the socialist countries also have reorganized their healthcare systems to create a national health services based on the principles of universal entitlement to care. These policies have led to greater accessibility for preventative and curative services for previously deprived groups. Expanded educational opportunity also has been a major priority of the socialist nations, as publicly subsidized education has become more widely available. Literacy campaigns in these countries have brought educational benefits to sectors of the population who earlier had not gone to school. End quote. Also, if you're unsure to trust the study I just showed you, the CIA themselves have released a document saying that Americans eat about the same amount as Soviet citizens each day, but the Soviet diet may be more nutritious. Communism always leads to a dictatorship. This argument either comes from a misunderstanding of Marxist terms, or just propaganda from the powers that be, saying that countries like the USSR were undemocratic regimes where people were not allowed to practice the democratic right they had before. Many people have come to the conclusion that the term dictatorship of the proletariat means a literal dictatorship. This is wrong. Dictatorship of the proletariat basically means a workers' state, as in the workers run the state. The second version of this argument is stupid, and anyone who believes this argument must do historical and mental acrobatics of some kind, and they also lack something called research. I suggest you watch the videos Democracy in the GDR and Democracy in Cuba. They are really good videos and very formative of the democracy in those specific countries. There are also some brilliant videos from the Finnish Bolshevik that talk about the democracy specifically in the USSR, so make sure you check those out. But for the sake of quickly debunking this point, I'll explain the Soviet Union's democratic process. The highest legislative organ in the USSR was the Supreme Soviet. The Supreme Soviet had two chambers who had equal rights to make laws. The first chamber was called the Soviet of the Union, where deputies would be elected by the people from electoral areas. There was one deputy for every 300,000 people, and they would be elected every 4 years. The second chamber was the Soviet of Nationalities, and for that the people would elect deputies on the basis of 25 deputies from each Union Republic, 11 deputies from each autonomous republic, 5 deputies from each autonomous region, and 1 deputy from each national area. In the Soviet of the Union, you would decide union-wide things, and in the Soviet of Nationalities, you would represent individual republics or your autonomous republic and so on. Union republics were allowed to recede from the Union, but border republics, autonomous republics, and autonomous regions were not. The idea of the republics was to grant cultural, national, and political right to oppressed nationalities. Unlike the Tsar's autocracy, which has been called the prison house of nations, oppressed people were recognized in the Soviet Union. Both of the chambers mentioned earlier elect a chairman and 2 vice-chairmen. It's the chairman's job to preside over the proceedings and direct the procedure. Sessions were convened by the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet 2 times a year, but additional special sessions can be convened by the Presidium or at the request of a Union Republic. The Presidium of the Supreme Soviet interpreted the laws in operation and issued decrees. They were elected by the Supreme Soviet at a sitting of both chambers. The Presidium consisted of a president and 16 vice-presidents, and a secretary of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet and 24 members. The Council of People's Commissars of the USSR were appointed by the Supreme Soviet. The Council of People's Commissars had a chairman, vice-chairman, chairman of the State Planning Commission, chairman of the Soviet Control Commission, the People's Commissars of the USSR, chairman of the Committee on Arts, chairman of the Committee on Higher Education, and chairman of the Board of the State Bank. These were ministers of sorts until they were changed into 1946. They were renamed to the Council of Ministers. But for the sake of streamlining this, I'm going to keep on calling them the Council of People's Commissars. There are many types of the CPC in the USSR. CPC meaning Council of People's Commissars. I'm just going to keep using this now so I can streamline the video. There was the All Union CPC, the Union Republic CPC, Autonomous Region CPC, and so on. For the sake of doing this argument quickly, I'm just going to mention the Republic CPCs. So the Republic CPC had a chairman of the CPC of the Union Republic, vice-chairman, chairman of the State Planning Commission, and representatives from the All-Union CPC. Now the People's Commissars. That was a lot of them. So just to quickly do this, I'm going to mention a couple so you can get the idea of what their jobs were. Like, all of them. So there was the PC of Defence, PC of Foreign Trade, PC of Foreign Affairs, PC of Railways, and so on. Now I'm going to stop this here because if I keep going on and on and on, it won't give it justice. So I'll just send you all to Pinball's video, which has... He just does it much better. And he does it in more detail than I ever could, so please, check him out. But what about before communism took over? Historically speaking, communism gave more democracies than the governments they replaced. Here's a list of countries before they turned communist. Russia was a near-feudal aristocracy. China was also a feudal society full of warlords and puppet states. Hungary, Romania and Bulgaria were all fascist puppets. Germany was a fascist dictatorship. Cuba was a US-funded dictatorship. Albania was an Italian fascist protectorate. Czechoslovakia, Poland and Yugoslavia were occupied by the Axis. And Vietnam, Korea and other third world nations were under the oppressive foot of colonialism and imperialism for years. But did he have more democracy after? Post-Soviet countries, for a lack of a better word, were shitholes. Look at Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Romania, Poland. Apart from Germany, which had money poured into its Western counterpart for the entirety of its existence to bring this better-in capitalism point of view, all post-Soviet countries are very corrupt and poor. Like, for fuck's sake, the dissolution of the USSR was undemocratic. When that happened, living standards plummeted. The industry that the people fought and died for were being sold off for literal pennies to private individuals. Child mortality went up and homelessness and joblessness skyrocketed. And I need not mention the AIDS epidemic that affected post-Soviet countries, mainly because, well, they sold off all the healthcare to private people. Marxism seeks to destroy the family. This argument to an extent is correct. Marxists do want to bring the destruction of the family. But what kind of family? The nuclear family? The extended family? Or even the childless family? Well, none of those. In fact, Marxists seek the destruction of a family that no one really talks about. The bourgeois family. A family that revolves around money, capital and greed. Marxists wish to abolish this family completely. I'll let Marx explain. Abolition of the family! Even the most radical flare-up of this infamous proposal of the communists. On what foundation is the present family, the bourgeois family, based? On capital, on private gain. In its completely developed form, this family only exists amongst the bourgeoisie. But the state of things finds its complement in the practical absence of the proletarians, and in public prostitution. The bourgeois family will vanish as a matter of course when its complement vanishes, and both will vanish with the vanishing of capital. What Marx is basically saying here is money has ruined the family. If we abolish money, no problem. Even if you don't believe the written work, have a look at the lives of these communists. Marx was married, Stalin was married, Lenin was married, you get the picture. The point is, if Marxism wants to bring the destruction of the family and marriage, why did its most devoted followers get married and have families? Human nature. This argument makes no sense. Like, it's genuinely believed that humans will only work if we have a monetary incentive, and that humans are naturally greedy. No. Human nature is shaped under the mode of production it lives under. Like, how do you all think we got this far? Did you really think our ancestors just starved in caves because they weren't getting paid to pick berries? As the saying goes, to look at people in a capitalist society and conclude that human nature is egoism is like looking at a factory where pollution is destroying their lungs and saying that it is human nature to cough. Everyone gets paid the same. Well, I think everyone knows this isn't true, but for quickly debunking this argument, I'm just going to use the Constitution of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. According to Chapter 10, Article 118 of the Constitution of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, quote, citizens of the USSR have the right to work, i.e., the right to guaranteed employment and payment for their work in accordance with its quantity and quality. No innovation. For this argument, I'm going to use the USSR. The USSR was one of the most innovative countries of its time. People forget what the Russian Empire was like. The majority of its industry was agricultural and so on. And then, in just under 3 decades, it became a space-exploring industrial, military and economic superpower, one that rivaled that of the United States. Just a reminder, when the USSR was born, the culture of these countries improved. Finally, peasants could go to libraries, theatres and even abroad, a luxury previously reserved for the rich and wealthy of the empire. And let me remind everyone watching of the 5-year plan, the rapid industrialization of the USSR under Stalin. Now, if it wasn't for that, you know, we all might be speaking German. Animal Farm. George Orwell's book Animal Farm is one of the worst books that has ever been used to debunk commies, even topping our next argument. The worst thing of this book is that schools force children to swallow everything in this with an uncritical mind. But what is Animal Farm about? Well, Animal Farm is a book that takes place in a farm that is ruled by the farm owner, Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones is not nice to the animals who live on the farm. Eventually, the animals band together under the leadership of the character Old Major to overthrow Mr. Jones. Right before the revolt, Old Major dies, so Napoleon and Snowball take charge and lead the revolt. Alright, time to knock this down in a couple of seconds. Animals win, Snowball gets killed by Napoleon, Napoleon becomes all-powerful dictator man with his pig friends, humans invade the farm because of reasons, famine time, people overthrow Napoleon, and the end. So, with the summary out of the way, let's get into the story itself. So, Animal Farm is a direct comparison to the Soviet Union. Old Major is a mixture of Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin, Napoleon is Stalin, Snowball is Trotsky, the other pigs like Squealer represent the Central Committee and the Supreme Soviet, Animalism is their version of communism, and Mr. Jones represents the Tsar. The problem with this book is that, 1. It downplays and exaggerates major events in the USSR, like exaggerating the Holodomor as being on purpose, and downplaying the capitalist invasion of the USSR, ignoring the years of sanctions and military threats. 2. Sweeping reductions of history, for example, combining Marx and Lenin as the same figure, completely missing Lenin's contributions to the revolution, and instead pinning them on the character representing Trotsky. And 3. Orwell ignored the material reality of the Soviet Union faced at the time. He wrote this when the USSR were literally fighting to the death against the Nazis. But then again, this all makes sense when you realise he never visited the USSR. Not like that's a good argument, but if people are going to keep using that against me, I'm going to keep using it against them. As well as this, Orwell was a racist, homophobic snitch. I mean, I get homophobia because, you know, homophobia was the thing back then. But while complaining about Big Brother and criticising Stalin's secret police, he reported communists to the IRD. So, yeah, the writer of 1984 reported any political opposition to the government. There is also what he called Paul Robson, a guy that visited the USSR, that being anti-white, despite him organising with white people. Look, I asked everyone who was watching the video to search up Orwell's list, and it'll show you how much this anti-authoritarian activist really believes in his ideals. Communist mass murderers. The topic of death counts under communism has been debunked again and again and again, but it always seems to come back with people who eat it up because it aligns with their worldview. So, hopefully this will be the final nail in the argument's coffin. There is no clear evidence that communism killed 100 million in 100 years. The origins of this myth comes from the Black Book of Communism, a book artificially inflated to reach the 100 million mark. Another problem about the book is that they counted criminals, German soldiers, Nazi collaborators, and people who weren't born as victims. Like, one guy could rape and murder 20 people, but as soon as they get sent to the gulag, they are the victim. Speaking of gulags, according to the Soviet Union's archive, 1.9 million people were sentenced to the gulag and labour colonies in 1938. That's out of 2.5 million people arrested between 1937 and 1948. Also, between 1921 and 1953, the archival data shows that 799,455 people were executed in the Soviet Union. Also, the rumour of everyone was permanently starving in the gulags, it's just that, a rumour. I'm not denying people didn't starve, but it wasn't an everyday thing. In fact, the majority of the famines in the gulags were during the Holodomor famine and World War II. Now, before I use this statistic, make sure you remember this doesn't mean every death in the gulag during this time frame was the result of the famine. The statistic also consists of natural causes, incurable illnesses, convicts killing each other, and accidents, like, I don't know, a mining accident. In 1938, 160,084 people died in the gulags. Even if you don't trust the Soviets, the CIA in a 1957 document said the exact same thing I am, like saying that 95% of gulag inmates were just common criminals, the same type of criminals that would be arrested in the United States. If you want to have more statistics of the gulag like ethnicity and crime, I suggest you guys read the paper Victims of the Soviet Penal System in the Pre-War Years, which is an accumulation of archival data and comparing it to its most prominent statistics of the gulags by writers such as Olga Shastanovskaya's numbers. But for the sake of argument, let's pretend for a moment that communism killed 100 million. How many people has capitalism killed? Before I get into the numbers, I suggest watching Hakim's, Vicky 1999's, Democrats and Marxist 01's, and Finbol's videos on the topic. They define the word capitalism that will be using for this argument. They also make a better video overall whilst going into more depth into the discussion in a shorter amount of time. Every year at least 8 million die from the lack of drinking water, 7.6 million die from malnutrition, 3 million die from curable illnesses, and 500,000 die from malaria. That's over 100 million easily preventable deaths every 5 years. This is not including the millions killed because the US didn't like a country developing a certain way. So if we're going to play the numbers game, it's obvious who wins in that regard. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. As always, sources are in the description, but if they are not there, they're in the pinned comment. Also, I beg everyone watching the video to watch the YouTubers I've mentioned. Also, an apology for Spooky Scary Socialist for stealing his idea. The reason I did this is because of my recent popularity with anti-communists. So I hope I've managed to educate at least one person or give more ammunition to people who already support Marxism. As for my Welsh independence video, that'll be out within the year. But to keep you all entertained, there'll be a video coming out for a special someone. Also, make sure to check out our Discord and website. Anyways, I'll see you all in the next video.